Hi guys, it's Oli from radseason, and I'm excited to be joined today by my childhood friend Carl Paoli. Carl and I met quite a few years ago now when we were kids growing up in Spain. Carl went on to become an elite gymnast and was on the national Spanish circuit for about 15 years. Following that, he then went into coaching, training, and mentoring thousands of people through movement, and then more recently onto lifestyle. And in 2014, he released a New York Times best-selling book called Freestyle. And yeah, Carl, great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. I feel very important all of a sudden with that that reading of a bio. Yeah, it's awesome to be here. I'm excited.
And whereabouts are you at the moment?
I'm currently in Central California in a place called Fresno. We left San Francisco exactly 87 days ago today, but who's counting, to shelter in place while the pandemic was happening, just because we had more space here and we could let the dog out and live a more normal life during this strange time that we're going through. And I thought we were going to be back in the city maybe 30 days ago, and we're still here. And I'm hoping that around June 15th we'll get new information so we can start transitioning back to the city and then wherever that takes us.
So is it still up in the air at the moment? You don't really know when you guys are going to be heading back?
We don't know. I think as of right now, the plan, which is ever changing, is to head back towards the end of this month, and then see what happens after that. I think the goal right now is to try to be as productive as we can, to minimize our stress levels in terms of just day-to-day household management, so to speak. And be able to focus on that which moves the needle, whether it's in our work or it's in our family relationships. So everything is up in the air. We're trying to choose the path that allows us to make the biggest impact with the least amount of stress on our bodies and our minds at the moment.
Yeah, it's a crazy time. Well, everything going on, man. I guess I'd love to take it back to when we met. I mean, one of the main memories I have of you is in a place called Milpameros in Spain, where I just remember you were running along the beach once and you're just doing all these backflips. I'm like, who is this guy, right? Like, what's going on here? And then you were telling me, you were pretty serious and really into gymnastics. And from then it's sort of like, when we became friends, sort of finding out that you were putting hours into this. It wasn't just something like, okay, I'm going to do a couple of flips on the beach. This was something that was daily practice. And I mean, how did you stay, I guess, motivated doing that at that time at such a young age?
Yeah, so when you and I met, I think we were 6 years old when we first met. And that's when I got into gymnastics. And then we would meet over the summers when you would come back down to Spain for summer vacation. And I had started doing gymnastics as part of an after school program. And although I was dedicating a lot of time then, I wasn't full-time training. But it was around the age of 9 or so when I got brought into this club, which was a higher level team, that I realized, oh yeah, this is the thing that I want to do, because it just has the path to what I, in my head at that age, could see being greatness. And one of the images of that was one of the coaches that eventually I got to work with. His name is Alvaro Montesinos in Spain, who was doing an iron cross in an L-sit position, like with his legs up on the rings at the Olympics in Seoul, South Korea. And I was like, that's where I want to go. I want to go to Seoul, South Korea, and compete in the Olympics. And that's what just kept me coming back. And then it didn't take long to realize that what I was learning through gymnastics, my training, was translating into school. I was feeling more confident. I didn't have to do, I stopped doing homework after the 6th grade because I didn't have to. I could just memorize things. I could put in very focused effort into my studies. And I started getting stronger around the age of 13, 14, where I could do things that other people could not do. So it was just a very impactful journey to go through. And it was all about the translation, how it translated. The problem arrived when I was 16, 17, when there were 2 things happening. One, I was starting to see that my friends were going out and they would spend most of their time hanging out, and I was always training. And I wondered, why can't I participate in something like that? And the other side was that I was starting to get some injuries. And those 2 things combined started to rock my boat a little bit. But I stayed on the course because I realized that I wasn't interested in going out. I wasn't interested in drinking. I wasn't interested in partying. I was interested in girls, but I just didn't want to have that night scene. I didn't need that social scene. So I created I had a very small group of friends that was like very intimate, very innocent, which allowed me to keep coming back to gymnastics. The problem became the physical stuff. I started just having injuries. And what I know now is that those injuries were not due to a poor physical practice, but rather a poor mental practice. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm in the position that I'm in today, where I can not only teach people how to move, but also how to think and to become more aware of what they're feeling.
Awesome. And where did it go from there? And then you went into, you were studying at university in Spain, is that right?
That's right. That's right. So actually, a friend of my sister's came to visit us, and I remember him arriving in his truck, and he had all these windsurf boards, and he had all this cool equipment, and he started talking to us about snowboarding and how he lived in Tarifa for the longest time, and that's where he was windsurfing. And he studied environmental science, and he worked on this project where he got on a boat and he went from the US all the way to Spain. He was working with NASA technology and putting in fiber optic cables into, the ground floor of the Atlantic. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. That's who I want to be. So that's when I decided I'm studying environmental science, because I'm going to be
this guy.
Dude, I was gonna snowboard, and I was gonna be on a boat working with robots and sending rockets up into the sky, which I had no clue what I was talking about, but it sounded really cool. So that's how I got into environmental science. And the realization was, on the first week of environmental science, was that environmental science was this wide open field where you could go in any direction you wanted. And there was dissonance from the beginning for a few reasons. The first one, was that they told us that the future is in genetic engineering. And I was like, okay, genetic engineering, let's do this. I'm like, I'm the future. And the other side was that they explained in certain subjects that we were studying that the planet itself is an organism, and we, the animals and the vegetation, are what's alive on that planet. But it's not the individuals, but rather the collective. So it's extremely important that when we're studying ecology, or we're working on implementing new policy or ways of practicing for different organizations, that an environmental awareness is rooted in self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And this sounded really interesting, but I just couldn't connect it with what they were also saying about the future being genetic engineering, when a lot of the genetic engineering was the problem that we were fighting in the first place. It's like GMOs. Okay, that's bad, but let's study genetic engineering and let's start, genetically modifying crops. I couldn't connect the dots. That being said, what environmental science did for me was it solidified the importance of having a practice that develops a greater level of self-awareness, and that we have a greater understanding, hope, of how the mechanics behind awareness works, which can be a genetic expression, epigenetics. Now we understand that this is something that is important and that we are influenced by our environment. So it's this like never-ending inward cycle of information, movement, and development that each one of us plays a little role in, and that we can express that in various ways. And without being too long-winded, one of the things that I realized was that there were campaigns out there. For example, there were a group of surfers that I met, and I forget who they were working with right now, but it was a group of surfers that were traveling with a group of scientists through Mexico, surfing and teaching coastal and ocean sustainability. And I was very interested in doing something like that, and that led me to going to Singapore for a little bit to study at NUS, or the National University of Singapore, where I was in the marine biology lab there, and eventually that brought me to the US.
And you were wakeboarding quite a bit over there?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I loved. I loved the wakeboarding side of things. That was fun because it allowed me to be on the boat, which was my dream. It allowed me to have a board, which is something I love doing. And I was, as a kid, also inspired by you and watching Sal Masekela, who you had on the show recently. So yeah, I've been influenced by these things, and every single one of them, although I haven't pursued them to a very deep place, like for example wakeboarding, it was enough exposure at a high level that it's affected the way that I think and do things.
Mm-hmm. And then from there, was that when you thought, okay, there was a bit of a change in career path, so to speak, and you thought, all right, I'm going to go back into movement and kind of almost pick up where you left off?
Yeah, this is what I realized when I moved to the US in 2004. I realized that in marine biology there was zero money. So I immediately had to get a side job, a second job, and that second job was coaching gymnastics to a group of boys who were non-competitive. And that's when I realized that I had something to offer in the field, not only of gymnastics, but fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I became a personal trainer. I remember my dad, and I was 22, and my dad sent me this article saying, personal trainers are making $110,000 a year. And I was like, what? $110,000 a year? I'm going into personal training. And this may sound superficial, but I was very keen on being independent. I was very keen on having enough financial resources that I could continue to build. I was very keen on understanding what business development meant. I've always been fascinated by the question, what is money, and why is it either taboo or something that makes us get lost and lose track of our own self-development. Mm-hmm. So I was very curious about making money. And as I became curious about making money and I became a personal trainer, I also realized how companies were making money off of personal trainers. And I realized that the gym business was a complete scam. They weren't adding value. They were just presenting value and then scaling by hoping that people would not come through and drop off, which mm-hmm. is how gyms make it when they sell memberships, for example. But thankfully, I crossed paths with CrossFit, and CrossFit led to a new way of practicing fitness, and seeing how the business can be run different. On top of that, there was media associated to it, which I was very keen on exploring. I always wanted to be a presenter or a host, or someone who had somewhat of a media presence. And that really just escalated and led to me becoming somewhat of a reference in the fitness world by teaching gymnastics applied to, in this case, the CrossFit methodology. And it's interesting to look back now, 10, 11, 12 years since that time, and see how things have changed, especially in the current climate that we're living in, where we're not only living through a pandemic, but the Black Lives Matter movement is really coming into effect. And unfortunately, the CrossFit CEO and founder has made some pretty insensitive remarks. And this has now caused a big tipping point in where CrossFit is as a brand and organization, and where we're going next.
And from past experience and knowledge within the industry, within fitness, and where do you see it going from now?
Yeah, well, one of the beauties of CrossFit was that when I first took my CrossFit Level 1, which was the certification that they offer for new CrossFit trainers, I took it in 2009, I believe. Yeah, 2009 or 2008. I can't remember right now if it was 2008 or 2009, but I remember the first day of showing up there at the course, they said, do you guys know what the definition of fitness is? And there were 50 people in there, and supposedly there were 50 fitness professionals, and nobody had a definition. And they gave us a definition, which was increased work capacity across broad time and modal domains. Very technical, but basically what it means is that it's the individual that's capable of doing everything and anything across different periods of time. And I thought, see, that's interesting. To have a definition of what you're doing is important. And I realized that I had to start defining who I was within that community. And now, 12 years later, I've been thinking about fitness beyond the physical movement or physical practice. And what I've come to realize is that what fitness really is if you break it down, the suffix ness is a quality or a state. And to be fit, beyond being able to pass on your genes to the next generation, is to have a standard that allows you to meet a purpose. And thus fitness is the state or quality of your being, of yourself, that allows you to express yourself in a way, also known as a standard, attached or associated to a purpose. So the question we must ask ourselves right now is, what is our purpose? And in fitness, that's where we need to start. What is our purpose as fitness practitioners?
Yeah, and when did you sort of see, like when did you think about moving over from movement training into like transitioning to more lifestyle design? When did that happen?
Yeah, so in 2010, I was teaching a seminar in, actually 2011, I was teaching a seminar in London. And at the end of the seminar, I felt compelled to share a personal story. And the story was of me having this dream of making it to the Olympics as a kid, and of me standing on the podium, looking around, having all the flashing lights and people celebrating me, getting the flowers, you know, the whole thing, the medal. And I explained that I was really disappointed in myself at the age of 19 when I had decided to leave gymnastics, and that dream that I had would never be accomplished. And for a long time, I was grieving the loss of gymnastics and the loss of hitting that milestone of standing on the podium. And then as I got older, what ended up happening was that I realized that the reason I wanted to stand on that podium was not only to prove to myself that I could do it, but for what was going to happen next, which was I was going to step off of the podium. I was going to go backstage behind the scenes to the locker rooms. I would celebrate with my friends, with my coaches. I would be able to go home and celebrate with family, and then use that as a platform to do the next thing. And that's when I realized that as important as the goal or achieving the goal is, it's being aware of for what you're achieving it. So what's coming next? And that's when I started practicing seeing every moment of clarity or every small achievement, every small accomplishment as big as achieving the winning of the Olympics. And not for the fact of just celebrating that I won the Olympics or I achieved something or I accomplished something or I checked the box, but for the reason that comes behind it, which is stepping off that victory, stepping off that accomplishment, and celebrating with friends and family. And what that celebration really looks like is in sharing what you've learned. It's in bringing together, bringing that knowledge and creating a new paradigm. And I shared this at this seminar because I wanted people to realize that even if they had come into the seminar and felt a little confused because the material that I taught was maybe a little far out there and maybe not what they were expecting, that's okay. That's simply a vehicle for them to start to be a little bit more introspective and to expand their knowledge. If they had come to the seminar and they had felt a little inspired, that they could use that inspiration as fuel to keep pushing. But the most important part was the insight. If they had achieved any insight or received anything that was clear to them that they could use, they had to treat that as a victory and then go out and share that with other people. And what I said in that moment was, I said, when you go out and share this, make sure you share it with your voice, as if you had come up with it, as if you had figured it out. Don't say Carl said at the freestyle seminar that if you do this, this, and this will happen. Because if you say that, what you're doing is you're diminishing the value, and people don't know who Carl is. They don't know what freestyle is. They know who you are. So you need to take ownership of this information. And in that moment, I realized that I was doing something that I really felt connected to. And right afterwards, a few coaches that I knew and I looked up to came up to me and said, "Hey, Carl, never say anything like that again. People don't care about that stuff. They don't want to hear that. They just want the information." And that's when I realized, okay, as someone who's a little bit of a rebel, I'm gonna do exactly that until that's proven wrong to me. And that's how I got into more of the going beyond movement practice.
Interesting, man. And I mean, I guess when we last met was over in Australia, and you were traveling like quite a bit back then, and you were like, okay, there's one thing I'm going to do is to try and not travel as much. That's, well, yeah. I mean, this 2020, no one really saw that coming. But it was like, okay, with the travel restrictions, I mean, how are you adapting your business around that, and how has that changed everything?
Well, a couple of things have happened. When I saw you in Manly and we hung out that day, I told you I'm going to try to travel less. And although I told you that day, I got home and I looked at my calendar and I was just booked out, and I was continuing to book more. And July 9th of 2019, I went on Instagram and I said, accountability post. This year, I've traveled 182 days. Next year, I want to cut this down by 50%. And out of the 50% of the travel, I want 20% of it to be work, 30% of it to be fun and visiting with family and friends. And fast forward to September of 2019, I realized, oh man, I'm feeling so burnt out. I just can't do it. I need to just quit, basically. So November 9th of 2019, I did my last seminar, and that was a movement seminar. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do anymore. I'm done. And that was the last one I did. And then all of a sudden 2020 hit, and I started getting, ants in my pants, kind of like, oh man, I have to do something. I have to start, planning a workshop or a seminar. I have to teach. I was just like, I have to do something. And I was supposed to go to China to give a lecture because a publishing house there translated my book, and they wanted to have me talk to their students for a weekend. And that got canceled, not for the pandemic, but rather because it didn't have enough demand. And I was like, oh, interesting. My demand in the physical world is not there. And I was starting, my ego was starting to get a little rocked. But then literally a week later, the pandemic began. Like China really started getting hit. And because that trip was canceled, my sister messaged me and said, hey, do you want to just come to Singapore instead and just hang out with us? And I was like, yeah, I'll come out. And I went to Singapore. I taught a workshop there while I was at it, of course. But that's when the pandemic started hitting. And I was like, oh, this is fine. It's not going to come to the US, until I got on the plane to come home. And I realized that every passenger on that plane was nervous. And what gave that away was we came into the plane, we started sitting down in the plane, and then all of a sudden one person pulled out a Lysol wipe to wipe their chair off. And then everybody stood up, and out of their bags, they started pulling out Lysol wipes. They started using hand sanitizer. They put a mask on. And I was like, oh, damn, people are scared.
Yeah.
Something is happening here. And when we landed in San Francisco, there were people on that plane that said that they were going to quarantine themselves. And I was like, quarantine? What are you talking about? Quarantine yourself? So I thought, do I need to quarantine myself? And I remember getting off the plane, and my wife picked me up, Tanya. I said, I'm not going to kiss you right now. I'm not going to hug you right now. I think we should keep a little bit of distance for a few days. And I did that, and I called my gym, the owner of the gym that I go and train at, and I said, hey, I was just in Singapore. Do you feel comfortable with me coming to the gym? He's like, no problem. Yeah, just come in. And that was the beginning. I realized, okay, this something's going to happen here, and we in the US are completely unaware of it at the moment, or believe it's not coming. So for me, it started with the pandemic on February 7th. And that's when I realized, okay, we're in this for the long haul, and this is going to take a while. So that was the day I said, 2020, let it be whatever it's going to be. Don't worry about trying to book travel. Don't worry about trying to create seminars. Just be a resource for value and support for as many people as you can be during this time. And do it with an open heart, meaning that you're going to mess up. And there are mistakes you're going to make, but those mistakes will be less important than the impact that you can make, the positive impact. So I've been just on the phone all day, every day, working with people, either just helping them process information, coming up with strategic ideas on how to either keep their gyms going or just transition, pivot jobs. I've been doing some paid gigs by doing online lifestyle design workshops, which are intended for identifying your mission, your purpose, and how you can adapt it into whatever you choose to do. And I've also been working with an organization called Acrosports and helping them reopen the doors when it's safe to do so. And they're based in San Francisco. So yeah, that's what I'm currently doing. And I'm talking to you too.
So you've been pretty busy. I mean, is there any, I guess it varies from case to case, but any kind of advice that you would give either people within the fitness industry or just in general, people that are trying to deal with this?
Yeah, I think that it's important to think about anything that we're doing through the lens of fitness, which once again is our ability to operate or perform at a standard that allows us to meet a purpose. So it's first asking yourself, what is it that you want to do, and what do you want to feel while you're doing it? In other words, you can ask yourself, who are you, or at least who do you think you are? What are you currently doing? Who are you doing it for? What do they need? And when you help them get their needs met, what kind of impact does that make in their lives?
Yeah.
And by simply asking yourself some simple questions like that, what ends up happening is that you start to change not what you're thinking, but how you're thinking about it. And when you do that, what ends up happening is that your behaviors start to translate into a growth in your business, or a higher visibility in your brand being your philosophy. It allows for people to see you for who you are, and it allows for people to choose whether to move towards you, away from you, or against you. And this is something that is very clear. Like right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, when one expresses where they stand, you will get people moving towards you. Yes, I'm with you, or against you. No, that's not what it is. It's this or that. Or away from you, meaning they just silence themselves and distance themselves. And that gives you a certain peace of mind, because you've chosen, and now you're not taking whatever actions people around you are choosing to take personally. And that allows you to continue to unfold. And this is, I think, the most important time for us to do this, not just individually, but also collectively. And to do it with the awareness that potentially you are wrong. And that's cool too.
And I guess, like now, I mean, sort of moving on to later this year and then next year, is the focus, is that going to be on lifestyle design for you, or what are you, what's kind of, if there's any goals now? I mean, there's so much obviously happening, but yeah, where do you see it going?
Yeah, I'm not making any plans, so to speak, but I am looking at the next 2 years. What I intend to do is to continue to be a student of what self-development is, with the intention of helping people become more conscious or more awake. In other words, be a participant in bringing us all to a place of planetary coherence, so to speak, or in other words, where what's in your head and in your heart and in your body is in alignment. So it's not like I'm thinking this one thing, but my heart is somewhere else and I feel like shit. I don't want that. I want people to be in alignment. And to do that through a practice of movement, which can be as simple as encouraging people to go surf or go snowboard or skate, or hand balancing, or training of some sort, or just running, mountain biking, whatever it may be active, but use that activity as a bridge to getting to know yourself. So that's my intention, to be a student of that game. Where I thrive is in a place or a position of leadership, where I'm either working with a group of people to bring them together, or in a place where I am communicating ways or strategies for deploying a vision, and putting all the little action steps into place, with the intention of experimenting what works and what doesn't work. In other words, in creating very quick progression and adaptation. And this sometimes is presented through branding. And branding is not what a lot of people think it is, which is just an aesthetic element. Branding is the essence of communicating one's philosophy, what one stands for. And this is something that in business development gets so lost and ends up becoming a big hole in their ability to scale and grow and to make positive impact, because people simply don't have something to anchor themselves to. And when they anchor themselves to something that doesn't have a brand or a philosophy that's clearly expressed, it becomes a very fragile ground to stand on. And I think more than ever right now, the world is asking us for strong communication of brand, strong communication of philosophy, and to notice that it's in that philosophy and what we stand for where a firm ground can be developed, and thus take the steps towards a more just planet, a more equal planet, a planet where we're actually working together and we can accept and respect all differences without getting lost in them.
Yeah. Awesome, man. If there's anyone that wants to get hold of you, what's the best way?
Yeah, the best way to do that is to simply look me up online. Just Google Carl Paoli and you'll find me. But you can email me, carl@freestyleconnection.com, or on Instagram or Twitter, yeah, YouTube, wherever you go, LinkedIn. I'm everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks a lot for your time, man. It was great chatting.
Dude, thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Thank you.